Chapter 13. Nancy threw herself to the right and rolled, covering her head and face with her arms. A split second later, she heard a deafening crash. She raised her head and stared. The heavy glass panels had shattered into a million pieces, broken by the rocks and construction debris lying on the ground near where she had been sitting. "Nancy, are you all right?" DJ came around the corner of the house at a run. "Yes," she said, sitting up. The metal frame that had surrounded the glass lay only inches beyond her feet, bent and twisted. DJ knelt beside her. "Are you sure you're okay? What happened?" "I saw the doors falling and got out of the way just in time." Nancy wiped mud off her cheek. "Careful, you're covered with splinters." He pulled a sliver of wood from her hair. "How in the world did that thing fall?" The construction crew arrived, one after another, exclaiming over the accident. Fortunately, Nancy's jeans had provided some protection, although she had a small cut on her arm. Walt Winchester pushed through the crowd. "I heard a crash. What happened?" DJ pointed to the ground. "The sliding doors fell out through the opening on the second floor. Nancy got out of the way just in time." "Are you all right, Miss Drew?" Winchester asked. "I'm fine, just a bit muddy," Nancy said. Winchester asked, "Who left those doors in such a precarious position?" The men glanced at one another and shook their heads. "I want a report from every one of you," the congressman went on. "I want to know where you were and what you were doing before this happened. Follow me." Nancy watched him lead the construction crew away. DJ stayed behind. She said to him, "I'm not so sure this was an accident." DJ squinted up at the master suite. "You could be right. The opening for the doors is cut to fit them. In order for them to fall through, the frame had to be tipped at an angle. None of my men would be dumb enough to do that." "Are you sure?" Nancy asked. DJ nodded. "I know all these guys. Of course, I don't know the two Glaziers. They came over from the mainland." "Who hired them?" "Scott. Who else?" Nancy frowned. She'd been thinking that the fact that Scott wasn't on the site eliminated him as a suspect. Now she realized he could have paid one of the men to attack her, as Hank had been paid. She walked toward her moped. "Where are you going?" DJ asked. "I've got to find Scott Winchester." Nancy started the motor and rode down the driveway. Finding Scott wasn't easy. He hadn't returned to the yacht, and no one was home at Angie's apartment. Nancy rode to the bellboy and asked one of the waitresses to check the schedule. "Angie's not due in until the dinner shift," the girl said. "But I saw her a while ago picking up a picnic lunch from the kitchen. You might try Mohegan Bluffs. That's her favorite spot on the island." Nancy once more climbed on her moped and headed down Spring Street. When she reached the bluffs, she rode past the lighthouse until she found the dirt lane Barb had shown her. She found Angie and Scott on a narrow spit of land overlooking the ocean. She couldn't wait any longer to get Scott alone. She'd have to question him in front of Angie. They were facing out to sea and didn't notice her on the path behind them. She studied the young couple for a moment. Their picnic basket and blanket were at the very edge of the cliff, and their arms were around each other. They were talking softly and seemed to be very much in love. Finally, she spoke. "Hi." "Nancy," Angie said. Both she and Scott jumped in surprise and scrambled to their feet. "What are you doing here?" Nancy tried to smile. "I'm afraid I'm looking for Scott." "Me? Why? Is there a problem?" Scott asked. He didn't seem particularly happy to see her, but it could have been because she'd interrupted his time alone with Angie, Nancy told herself. "There was an accident at the construction site this morning." Nancy told him what had happened. "I was wondering what happened to you," Angie said. "You're covered with dirt." Nancy idly brushed off a clump of dried mud clinging to her jeans. "Scott, how well do you know the glaziers you hired to install the window glass?" Not at all, he said. I found their names in the phone book. Are you sure you're not hurt? I'm fine, but I need to ask you another question. How did you get that bruise on your cheek? Slightly embarrassed, he touched the bluish-yellow spot. The yacht jibed unexpectedly when I was out sailing, and I didn't duck the boom fast enough. Why? Nancy didn't answer him. I've asked you this before, but I have to ask again. How well did you know Tom Haines? Scott frowned. I told you, he was just one of the guys on the crew. Did you like him? Did he like you? I think he resented me, to tell you the truth. My father's money especially. I overheard him calling me little rich boy a couple of times. Nancy sighed. I found evidence that indicates you and Tom had another type of relationship. Scott's face paled. He acted agitated and almost frightened. What evidence are you talking about? I found the blackmail note Tom sent you, Nancy said quietly. What? Scott threw his arms out, apparently frustrated. You've got it all wrong. Scott, take it easy, Angie said. Angie. He turned toward her, and his arm hit her chest. Angie stumbled, then screamed as her foot slid over the edge of the cliff. Scott grabbed her arm, but her weight pulled him to the very edge of the cliff. Nancy leaped forward and caught Scott by his belt. I've got you! Angie hung over the steep drop while Scott teetered on the edge, clutching her arm desperately. Only Nancy's strength kept him from being dragged over the side after Angie. Digging her feet into the ground, Nancy threw her weight backward, trying to pull them toward her. Hold on, Scott, hold on, she gasped as she leaned back farther. Slowly, Scott inched toward her. Transferring her weight, Nancy managed to take a step backward, then another. She tightened her grip on Scott's belt and suddenly threw herself flat onto her back. Scott flew toward her, pulling Angie with him. The three of them sprawled on the grass in a heap. They lay still, panting, their hearts racing. After a moment, Scott groaned and pulled Angie to him, holding her close. I don't believe it. I almost killed you. It was an accident, Angie said, caressing his cheek. It was stupid, stupid, stupid. Scott buried his face in her hair. Nancy moved away slightly and knelt on the grass. It was my fault. I shouldn't have upset you. After all, I don't see how you could have killed Tom, even if he was blackmailing you. Your father says you were on the yacht with him last Friday night. Scott's shoulders slumped forward in defeat. You don't understand. He took a deep breath, shuddering. My father can't give me an alibi. He wasn't on the yacht himself. What do you mean? Nancy asked, puzzled. For a long moment he said nothing. His eyes were dull with pain, and he was utterly shaken. Finally, Scott raised his head and stared at Nancy. That blackmail note wasn't sent to me. It was sent to my father.